Richard Dawkins is Professor for the Public Understanding of Science at Oxford University. The evolutionary biologist has outspoken views on religion, the teaching of science and what he calls pseudoscience. He talked to Sheena MacDonald about the falling numbers studying science at GCSE and A-level.
Well, the government's response to this perceived lack of enthusiasm for science has been to refashion the GCSE curriculum. So it's themed now, science teaching. Do you think that will work?
What we want to show children is how enthralling science can be. It's not about non-stick frying pans. It's not about the usefulness of science, or it shouldn't be. And I fear that that's the thrust of the themed initiative. What I'd like to see is, by all means, move at least partly out of the lab, at least partly move away from the cult of the Bunsen burner, towards the universe, geological time, evolution, the diversity of life, the history of life, the enormous spaces and enormous times that we have to cope with, the strange world of the very small, quantum theory, which is very hard to understand, but you can enthrall children with the sheer mysteriousness of it. I think that the same kind of buzz that many children get from science fiction could be used in real science, because real science does have some of the thrill of science fiction, and you completely lose that if you simply stress the everyday usefulness of science, what I call non-stick frying pan science.
Why do you think children give up on science at such an early age?
Well, I must say that when I was at school it was very similar, and I think it's partly that science is treated very much as a practical subject, or certainly was, as what I mentioned before as the cult of the Bunsen burner. It was thought you had to get your hands dirty all the time, which is, well, on the face of it, that sounds like a laudable aim. But it leaves out so much of what's exciting and important. You don't, after all, need to play a musical instrument in order to appreciate music. You could even be taught expertise in music appreciation. You can become an expert music critic, as Bernard Shaw was, for example, without being able to play a note on any instrument. And the early stages of learning a musical instrument, five-finger exercises, can be pretty tedious, just like the early stages of science on the Bunsen burner can be pretty tedious. Somebody has to do it. I mean, we need people to do the five-finger exercises, both in music and in science. But there are a lot of other people who could perhaps be brought to rather an advanced level of science appreciation.
One of the problems is that there are fewer and fewer teachers. Almost a quarter of schools in England don't have anybody with any physics qualification on their staff. So there's a danger of a vicious downward spiral.
Yes, that downward spiral is clearly a risk, and by the very nature of the word spiral, its potential is to get worse. I suppose another thing is that as physical scientists become rarer in universities, they tend to get snapped up for research jobs and for things like jobs in the city. I mean, you know, because they're mathematically skilled, and so you actually, they do have a sellable skill outside the world of academics and education, and indeed outside the world of physics. And so the teaching profession becomes a sort of poor relation, which is absolutely tragic, because it is such an honourable profession and really deserves the very best.
Should the UK give up on science altogether?
Well, what an awful thought, because we've got such an immensely distinguished history right up to recent times, and it could well be said that in the Second World War was won by Britain's physicists as much as by Britain's soldiers. I mean, it was an incredible effort of sheer brain power on the part of British physicists, inventing radar, inventing all sorts of highly ingenious weapon system, defensive as well as offensive, code breaking. British physical science has been second to none, and it would be a real tragedy if this was to disappear in the future. It is an incredible privilege to be alive in a century where so much more is obviously in any century there's a bit more understood than in previous centuries, but in the century in which we are alive, we know enormously more and understand hugely more than any of our predecessors. To turn our back, for children to turn their back on this, just when it starts getting really, really exciting, is so sad, because just think what they're missing.
Now, you've made headlines recently for being very vociferously opposed to teaching creationism in schools. The DFES has said that any such material which is sent to schools is inappropriate to the science curriculum. So there's no danger, is there?
Well, we have to be careful here, because if you say we mustn't teach something, then it looks as though you're trying to suppress it, and that looks intolerant, and it looks as though we've got something to be afraid of, which we certainly haven't. I don't mind at all going into a school and being asked questions about creationism and evolution, and I'm very happy to explain that evolution is a fact, there's no question about it. It's a fact in the same sense as continental drift, that plate tectonics is a fact. It's a fact in the same sense as the Earth orbits the Sun,